I remember him saying, like, "You're crazy if you think you can sell a deodorant for $35." And then I thought, maybe he's right. Where are the rich ladies?
Holly Eve is the founder and CEO of Madame Lenny, a best-selling all-natural women's deodorant. She is also a Princeton keynote speaker, mental health public speaker, and Forbes contributor.
For years, I had been trying everything at the store, and then she asked me 5 words that changed the trajectory of my life. She said, "Have you ever tried lemons?" Like right away, I just remember being like, this is fucking amazing. And then I got a call from Urban Outfitters that they wanted to carry my product, and that doesn't happen. I didn't know that my company could make that much money that quickly. I think anyone starting a company or an idea and you do something and it doesn't go right, I think that's where a lot of people quit, and I didn't quit. That was May 30th, 2016, and I haven't stopped since.
Holly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
Of course, of course. So you have an incredible story that has inspired so many people and led to you speaking at USC, speaking at Princeton. If someone has just clicked on this video and is about to listen to your story, what is something you think they'll be able to kind of walk away with at the end?
I hope that my story can inspire someone. We all have stories of struggle. We all have some type of trauma that's happened, and we all have a dream. And so, if there's one thing that I would like someone to take away, is that we can go through really difficult things and we can still persevere and we can still be successful.
That's great. Well, let's get into it. So I think this all starts around age 19 when you moved from New Mexico to California to pursue college and to ultimately a career in celebrity TV makeup. Can you kind of take us back to what was happening around that time and how the seeds were being planted for what ultimately became Madame Lemmy?
Yeah, I'll even take it back a step further
Awesome.
to
Let's start from the first.
my childhood. And it's probably not a common thing that people talk about on your podcast or most podcasts related to entrepreneurship, but it does later in the story tie into how my company came about. I grew up in New Mexico, and my parents are not entrepreneurs. My dad, he was first in the military for 25 years. He worked at the post office. My mom worked on and off as a waitress. And yeah, again, something not common to talk about in an entrepreneurship podcast. But as a child, I was sexually abused when I was 3. And when I spoke at your class at USC, I always talk about this. A couple of reasons. It is so common, especially with women. I think it's something that needs to be talked about more. And though my family was very loving, and I think it's important to talk about this before going into moving to California. I grew up in an alcoholic home, a very loving home, but dysfunctional, loving home. We put the fun in dysfunction. And I set that up just because those are some of the difficult things that I had gone through. And as a result, developed a drug and alcohol addiction and to cope with those things. And I've now been sober for almost 14 years. So I did get sober after that. But to answer your question of moving to California, when I was going through that journey and right before I got sober, there were a lot of things I wanted to be. A business owner was never one of them. That never crossed my mind. I didn't grow up knowing that word, entrepreneur. And so when I decided to move to California, I wanted to pursue a career in fashion and makeup. I really discovered the love for makeup artistry. So that's how I ended up moving to California to set up the story for you.
No, for sure. And was the intention to go to university there to kind of learn about this, or did you have a job opportunity that you were accepting there?
I went to the Art Institute, and then when I was going there, I found a makeup school. I was also working at a makeup counter, and so I had this vision that somehow I wanted to work as a makeup artist, maybe in TV or in fashion, and I started getting some jobs. Ironically, I would look on Craigslist and find like USC jobs for students who were doing film projects, and started getting jobs like that. And then I got sober, and I think that really opened up a lot for me, because anyone who struggled with addiction or alcoholism, it's really hard to see a path clear ahead of you. And And I think that started opening a lot of doors. And right after I got sober, I got booked on Fashion Week in New York for really
Hmm.
big companies. And I ended up moving there pretty quickly after that. Have you been to New York?
I have.
It's, the
Of
energy, like
course.
it pulls
Yeah.
you in. So when you go, there's like something that is just, if you're meant to live there, you move
Hmm.
there. And it's chaotic there, but it was fun, and I pretty quickly started working on television shows. I started working on Project Runway. I worked as a field makeup artist on The Doctors, on a lot of commercials. I somehow got into this thing with like billionaires and their wives,
Hmm.
this like niche of people, and I was really able to kind of be a fly on the wall and see like the lives of some of these people, which again will tie into my product development
Of
later
course.
on.
I think you'd mentioned in another appearance that kind of when you got sober, you were able to realize these opportunities around you and these doors around you that had been kind of cracked open. But when you become sober, you're more able to kind of capitalize on them and notice them. Did you
Yeah.
realize that starting to happen around then?
Absolutely. Do you have friends or do you know people that are sober?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if
Yeah.
they've talked about this with you, but there's like something, talk about like the pink cloud, and there is this like euphoria. I think that we all have magical things happening to us and for us every day. It's if we're awake enough to notice them. And of course, drinking and doing drugs to cope with things, I couldn't um, see all of the things around us. It's this synchronicity, we were talking about that word earlier. I think there are, you call it universe or God or whatever it is. I think
Hmm.
these things are happening all the time. And when I did get sober, I started noticing them. And I will say that sometimes these things will happen, and sometimes it takes months or years later. Like even you sitting here now, I'm sure if you
Hmm.
look at the series of finishing school and getting a job and like how did you end up in this moment, you see how everything ties back to something.
Could you possibly give an example of maybe one of those doors that you saw starting to open up around you at that time?
Yeah, one of them, and there's more stories of people
Hmm.
that I met in my building, but when I moved into a building on 57th and 10th in New York, and I had been sober for a little while, and I was wanting to get more into TV, and I talked to everyone. I'm like chatty Cathy, I'm
Hmm.
always talking, and I want to get to know people. And there was someone in my building that I was talking to, and I just started asking him questions. I told him I was a makeup artist, and he was one of the agents that was booking makeup artists for Project Runway.
Hmm.
And just through a simple conversation, it's how I got booked on that show. And I worked on that
Hmm.
for about 5 seasons.
Wow. So you were a makeup artist for around 10 to 12 years, is that right?
12 years, yeah.
And towards the 11th and 12th years, do you think this is kind of what I want to do for the rest of my career? It seems like you were, having a lot of fun traveling to New York, getting these great opportunities. Or did you think that you wanted something else from your career?
It's interesting that you asked that because around that time, I remember a very clear time period and a particular day. I was going back, my boyfriend at the time, I was going back between LA and New York and working. And I remember I was in Pasadena and I just had this really overwhelming feeling like I don't want to be doing this anymore. I don't think this is what I'm meant to be doing. And it wasn't too long after that that I had my idea for my company.
Hmm.
I don't know if somehow subconsciously I knew something else was coming or if that feeling created me to do something else, a pivot. I was listening to your
Hmm.
podcast from before about pivoting. Um, I don't know what it was, but I did have a feeling. And I was working on a Peter Lindbergh. He was a really famous fashion photographer. I'm sure you've seen his work
Hmm.
if you don't know of him. I was working on this Vogue shoot in Malibu. I was one of the makeup artists, and there were all these top models, really known models, and it's like the dream job to work on that type of shoe. And I remember I was looking around and everyone was curing cancer. It's like it's so chaotic when you're working on something like that. And I just remember thinking like I don't think I want this for my life where to get to that type of job, to be working
Hmm.
with that type of talent. And I was amazed by it, but at the same time I realized this is not what I see for my future. And I think it's important for everyone to pay attention to those moments because I worked really hard to get to a certain place and I saw kind of this fork in the road. Do I want to continue this path and be traveling a lot, or do I want to have a family and be married? I don't know, and do something else. And I made a decision to,
Mhm.
my company made the decision for me, but that's how I ultimately knew I wanted to do something else.
I think for a lot of us, we have those kind of moments where there's some sort of gut feeling where we think we are either in the right spot or we're not in the right spot. We want to go and do something, and sometimes it doesn't even feel logical. There's just such a strong gut feeling, and more oftentimes than not, it ends up being the right one. So
Yeah.
you said that happened previous to you getting the first kind of spark of the idea for Madame Lemmy. What was that first spark that?
Yeah. So to quickly go back to the beginning
Mhm.
of my story, why I mentioned what had happened while I was living in New York, um, I, and this to back up, it was before I had that thought of I want to be doing something else. It was about a year and a half before that, living in New York, I was sexually assaulted on the subway. And it was the second time in New York that it had happened. And it took a year and a half to go to trial. Things are just so backed up. And that whole process was really frustrating and really intimidating. And um, because of what had happened to me when I was a kid, my parents tried to do things. There was never any justice. That person was never arrested. Since then, that was in the 90s, laws have changed. But it was hard growing up and knowing that. And so when that happened to me and it went to trial, and the person, the second time who assaulted me, he was found guilty, and it was his third offense, so it should have been a felony. But because of some technicality, one of the other cases that he had was dropped. And so it dropped down to misdemeanor. And I saw him at the courthouse after. And the amazing part to that is that both the police officer and the guy who chased him with me, they showed up to the hearing a year and a half later, which was healing for me that people do care. And I was talking to the police officer after um, we were in the courthouse, and I saw him outside, and I wasn't going to say anything to him. I was angry,
Mhm.
but I kind of carried that anger for several months. And it wasn't just him, it was a lot of things that had happened to me, a lot of injustices that I felt, not just for myself, but for women, for other people, a lot of anger, and even being sober. I mean, that's a lot of times when people drink and do drugs, when things like that happen, you find a way to cope with it. And when you're sober, you feel a lot of things. And I
Mhm.
felt a lot of anger. And I was running one day and along the Hudson, and I got really mad about what had happened. And I thought, I'm going to go and get this person's information and I'm going to personally sue him. And it was not a money motive. It was just something else needs to be done. And I went to the courthouse on Wall Street, and there was this beautiful cop like sitting guarding the area where I'd have to go to get paperwork that I needed for the case. And I told her what had happened, and I was like crying and just like very much in this like story, because really up until that point I had felt like a victim a lot of my life. And she was just listening, and she said something that really it stuck with me ever since then. It's so funny because whenever I'd speak at USC, people always in letters they'll always point out this part. She just said really calmly, "Honey, it's time for you to take your power back." And after she said that, she asked if I had ever heard of Krav Maga. And I said, no, what is that? And she said, it's the most lethal form of self defense taught to Israeli soldiers. And she said, I think you should go take that. I think you should take this self defense for yourself. And I left the courthouse and I didn't get his information. And I never went back to this day. I don't have that. And it wasn't long after that, I was in a Krav Maga class on 63rd and Central Park West
Mhm.
in New York, and um, I was paired with this woman. I always joke, I think she'd been doing Krav Maga from the womb. I thought she was going to beat me up. I was terrified, and at that same time, I had a rash from a natural deodorant that I was using, and I was embarrassed. I didn't want her to see it. She's like kicking at me. And then finally I told her what had happened. And then she asked me 5 words that changed the trajectory of my life. She said, "Have you ever tried lemons?" To go back, why I was trying natural deodorant. Years later, when I was living in California, my best friend was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer at a really young age of 30. And she was the person who kept telling me to go to a natural deodorant. And I'd been trying for years. And just the timing of everything, I finally found this natural deodorant that worked. It gave me a rash, and I kept using it because it was the only thing that worked. I didn't smell. My boyfriend at the time, he's like, "You have to stop using that. It's like causing this rash." I was like, "You don't understand. I'm not smelling." I didn't want to put on like the Secret and those other things because of what had happened to her. And so I say all of that and all of those stories to just point out that all of these really horrific things and bad things that I thought had happened to me led to how I started my company.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for kind of being vulnerable and sharing those stories. I think it helps a lot of people in the audience. So you'd come to this police station kind of thinking, I guess, what a lot of people do, which is I want to personally right this wrong if the system won't do it for me. And that ultimately led you to Krav Maga classes, which is probably not what you're intending. And so,
Yeah.
and then through the trainer there, she'd recommended you try lemons to kind of, I guess, solve your own personal problem. You weren't even thinking about starting a business. And so did you
Yeah.
go home that day and try to use lemons as deodorant?
I waited for the rash to go away, and I remember going to Whole Foods in Columbus Circle, and I bought a bunch of lemons, and I was cutting them up and using them, and like right away, I just remember being like, "This is fucking amazing." I was just swiping on lemon, and I wasn't sweating. Not only did I not smell,
Hmm.
I wasn't sweating, and it was like my mind was blown because for years I had been trying everything at the store. My friend who had cancer, she was living in Venice, and she had everything from like Whole Foods and like medicinal, like really weird things that smelled funny, and I would try them and nothing worked. So for years I was trying different things, and so that's my mind was just blown that I could just buy a lemon and cut it up,
Hmm.
and it was more effective than antiperspirants that I was buying.
Hmm. And so this was literally just a lemon from Whole Foods you sliced up and kind of just rubbed on yourself. This isn't any sort of like lemon juice or lemon
No,
powder or anything like that.
no, it
And
was just
so,
straight up lemon.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you're solving your own problem by doing this. When does it kind of dawn on you that there's actually a opportunity here to create a product that can solve more people's problems than just mine?
It was a couple things. I was working on a commercial. It was like a Budweiser commercial somewhere in Pennsylvania, and I couldn't find lemons. And I think that's when I started thinking there could be a better, more practical way for this. And then I don't know how long after that it was. It might have been a couple months of doing that. And I was at a lunch with my best friend and a couple people in the West Village, and they were all talking about using natural products and making products. And one of the women, she was talking about how she had this, I don't know how she was describing it. She was like mushing up something and she was like making her own
Hmm.
skincare. And I just randomly said, "I've been using lemon. I'm going to turn it into a company." And I always say it was just this light bulb moment. And later that day, um, the woman and I, my friend and I, we were walking, and said, "I'm going to start this company, and I'm going to call it Lemmy."
Hmm.
My cousin's dog's name is Lemmy Pie, so I was thinking lemon, Lemmy Pie, Lemmy. That's cute. And that was May 30th, 2016, and I haven't stopped since.
After 12 years working, makeup, television, where, how did you know where to start? I mean, this is kind of like the initial, a lot of people have that vision like you did, and
Yeah.
some of them actually are able to solve their own problem. Very few are actually able to go ahead and build a company around that. And so how did you sort of feel empowered from the beginning? What were your first kind of steps in creating maybe the first minimum viable product or kind of testing the markets?
Well, first say I didn't know what I didn't know, and that's how I knew to keep going. I think if
Mhm.
most people knew what it took to start a business, what it takes to start the type of business that I was branching out to do. I mean, I knew nothing. And maybe those times that I was doing drugs when I shouldn't have been, I wasn't paying attention in a chemistry class if I took one. Um, And I grew up in New Mexico, so that's like the reference Breaking Bad that we have to chemistry. So I don't have a chemistry background, and now I do. At the time, I didn't have a chemistry background. I certainly didn't have a business background. I had never taken a business class. That word entrepreneur, it really was not, I don't recall ever growing up and hearing that word. We have blue collar workers. I don't really know people. I didn't know people growing up starting a business. And so not knowing what it would take, I think, helps me as you keep going in a business. It's like, what am I doing? This is so hard. Um, but I had a problem of TMI. Just I eat healthy, I'm vegan, I don't drink, and just I didn't want to smell in front of people that I was doing makeup for. I think I just have like a strong scent. Doesn't matter how healthy I am, it's just genetics. And so that is why I kept going back to using conventional antiperspirants. Doing someone's makeup, you're so close to them, you don't want to smell bad. And so I solved this problem for myself based on a problem my friend had of witnessing her going through really challenging, horrific times having breast cancer, and her telling me, I think you should change your products. I think you should change your deodorant. I think you should change like, a lot of things in my lifestyle. I stopped eating meat because of her. There were a lot of things that I saw this holistic way of her living. She was given 9 months to live, and she tragically passed away 6 months before I launched my company. But she lived 12 years with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, which is not heard of. It's a very long time to have that type of cancer. And I was just determined to take my lessons from her, finding something that worked for myself, and how can I make this available for more women to use.
I'm sure she must have been a massive inspiration as you encountered a lot of those hurdles of starting a company because, like you mentioned, you don't know what you don't know, and
Yeah.
sometimes it is this superpower of naivety to not know that because if
Yeah.
you knew what it would require, a lot of people would turn away. And as you mentioned, also there's not really a job description of entrepreneurship, and so maybe that's why a lot of people don't consider going into it. And it kind of just requires, again, creating your own product from Whole Foods, and then that
Yeah.
ends up becoming a business. I think it was around this time that you had ran into somebody in an elevator, I believe in New York, and this ultimately led to the first actual product that became the deodorant. Is that right?
So when I decided that I was going to turn this into a product, I realized I can't sell lemons. They're already being sold. I have to find a way to turn this into a tangible product that I could then market, put Lemmy on, Madame Lemmy, and this idea, if lemon is liquid, it's going to go bad. What is something that's portable? And this idea of, oh, powder, it could be a powder product. And I thought about my grandmothers, they would use these powder boxes and they would put on like with a puff, maybe your grandmother, your aunts as well, mother, putting body powder on. It was a ritual. It was a thing that women used to do. And so I certainly did not invent this. I was just saying, brought it back and made it non-toxic. Um, I bought different machines on Amazon, and whenever I speak at schools or USC, I always tell people I went to a school far more prestigious than theirs, Google University. I got my master's in YouTube, and I was seeing what other people were doing. I was trying to figure out how can I turn lemons into powder, and I didn't know you can just buy lemon peel powder. And I'm glad that I didn't know that because I went through this process of chemistry pretty much and buying machines and figuring out what can transform this liquid into powder. And then I got a dehydrator and then I figured that out. And when I finally turned it into powder, this bright yellow powder, I was so proud of myself. And I was living with a guy at the time. And I remember tall dude, he was going to a party and he wore this like bright white Hugo Boss shirt. And I was like, I'm using this lemon. I turned it into this powder. He saw me in the kitchen doing it. I was like, it works so well. You have to try it. And I gave him this like little puff that I bought on Amazon and this jar of bright yellow lemon powder. And he put it on and he wasn't gone long. He was there a couple hours and he came back and he was fuming. He was so mad. his whole shirt was like dripping. It was not only like yellow here, but from him sweating, and it was like the middle of summer. It had like dripped down. I always say I need to replace that fucking shirt. It's like it was really yellow. And I got really discouraged for a minute, but just for a minute. And I felt really bad. And I think anyone starting a company or an idea and you do something and it doesn't go right, I think that's where a lot of people quit. And I didn't quit. I just thought, okay, I went back to my Google University and what else can I put in there? And I found other powders and I had like A/B testing, and I would put maybe like zinc oxide or cornstarch or different ingredients. And then I pretty much had figured out the powder formula, but I didn't know about um, the essential oils. And I had remembered about a year prior to that, or maybe it was a year and a half before this idea, I met someone in my elevator and I hadn't seen him before. And he was with his boyfriend, and we live in a high rise. And so we're talking for a while, and he said, "Do you want to come to my apartment?" And normally that would be kind of creepy, but it was like he's in my building, he's with his boyfriend, it's safe. And so I went with him, and he made some tea. And when I got into his apartment, speaking of Breaking Bad, I was like, he's making fucking meth, like he's making drugs. There's like I need to get out of here. And it turns out he's an agoraphobic Oxford-trained chemist. So if anyone doesn't know agoraphobia, it's people that have the fear of leaving their house, so they stay in. And so he had like tinctures and bottles, and it looked like a mad science lab. And he wasn't making drugs; he was making liqueurs and with like different essential oils. And it was a chemistry lab. And so I couldn't remember what his apartment was, and it took me 2 weeks. And I finally figured out, with the help of like the front desk, his apartment. And I knocked on his door, and he said, "Hi, do you remember me? I have this idea." And it's so funny. He opened the door. He was making lunch. He had his apron on his clothes, and he was holding a pan of shrimp as I'm like pitching to him what I'm doing. And I was like, "Do you think you could help me?" And he invited me in, and he not only helped me create all of the scents for my product, he really taught me the breakdown of what I was doing and chemistry. And I was weighing things in tablespoons. Again, you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't know that I needed a scale and that I needed grams and that each ingredient was a different density and weight. And so I was just kind of guessing. And he really taught me the chemistry behind what I was doing. And by luck, I guess, I just figured out this exact formula that worked. And then he helped me put it all together. He used to make fireworks in Japan, and which is a powder process. And so we were using that same process in his living room and making the product that way with powder. And he's still my good friend. I talk to him all the time. We still brainstorm on ideas.
So that's great. You were working by yourself in your apartment to kind of tinker it together, your own product, which I think is a lot of people wouldn't go that route. A lot of people would think, oh, I need to find some company that can do the chemical manufacturing for me, and then I'm going to outsource the marketing. But you were just trying to build it, again, using YouTube University and ingredients from the neighborhood grocery store to put something together. And then, as luck would have it, someone in your building was sort of the expert in the chemistry to help take you to the next step.
I didn't even know that you could go to a manufacturer and pitch that. And luckily, I mean, I didn't have the money to do that, but I've talked to people, and a lot of people at USC, and God bless them, they have money because their family has money and they have like a lot of funds available. And I'll talk to them and they're like, "Oh, we're starting this company," and they're like 20 years old, and they are working with a manufacturer who's quoted them like 10,000 minimum per SKU, and they're doing 4 SKUs. I'm like, "You're going to have 40,000 SKUs and you don't even have, like, you don't know if that's going to sell." When I launched my company, it took me over a year to sell 2,000 units that I had put together. So I think the best way, whether you have startup money or you're just being really scrappy, is to see how far you can go on your own to figure things out, especially certain CPG brands, or if it's a cosmetic brand. It's always helpful when you create something and you own that formula. I still own 100% of the formulas that I've created.
Tell us a little bit about after you've kind of finalized the first formula to go to market. You've created Madame Lemmy. You've identified the brand. You have the actual product. You make an interesting decision a smart decision to price it a lot higher than typical women's deodorant. So a single unit of Madame Lemmy deodorant costs around $22 for the travel size. Is that right?
The travel size. At the time, I had just the large size, and it was $35. And to go back a little bit, when I was developing that product, and to tie back what I was saying, I was working with all those billionaire people and their wives, I saw in their bathrooms the type of products they had, like really expensive skincare, and a lot of them then just had like Secret. And so I thought, how can I merge high-end, ethically sourced ingredients into a formula with like really bougie packaging at a higher price point? And also the idea that you can always start higher. A lot of brands will kind of rip themselves off in the terms of they'll start a higher end company and then they want to maximize more of a mastige market instead of prestige. And they can then do a very similar product with different branding at a lower price. But it's hard if you start with a lower price point and then you try to do something luxurious. So I thought, I want to do something really high end to begin with. I hadn't really seen anything done with deodorant at the time. Now there's like everyone and their mother owns a natural deodorant brand, which is great because there's so many options that people can choose from now. And so once I found the packaging, I was going to SBDC, Small Business Development Center, where I met Albert, which we can talk about. And one of the other consultants there had told me about Cosmoprof North America, and that's where I went and I found my packaging. So there are a lot of trade shows where, as a small brand or starting a brand, I think it's important because if you just call manufacturers in China, or you go on Alibaba, you're not really talking to someone, you don't know them. But when you go to these trade shows where both parties are paying to be there, you can trust it and you're developing relationships. The manufacturer that I found, they had really high minimums. Usually it's in the high thousands. And I explained what I was doing and I convinced them to let me do 500 units per SKU. That manufacturer took on what I was doing and said yes with the hope that this is going to grow. And since then, I've ordered hundreds of thousands of units from them. So when I did have the finished product, it's a gold stamped product. It's really high end, different than a typical deodorant. It's a different application. I thought I'm going to sell this at a higher price point. And at the time, I like really wanted to get into Barney's. Luckily, that didn't happen. They went out of business. But that's kind of what I had in mind, that really high end type of department store. And Albert, who you had on last week, he was one of the first people that I showed my idea to. And just like a little side story, anyone who wants to start a business, to show like how little I knew about business. I remember I had printed all the artwork the night before. I had my powder that I brought to him. We were sitting talking and he looked really interested in what I was doing. And I thought, oh, he must just pretend he's interested in everyone's product. This is what he does. And then he said, what's your background? And I remember being so offended, thinking like, why is he hitting on me? And so I like rolled my eyes and I answered him and I was like, Lithuanian. And he was like, that's really nice to know where your family's from, but what's your like business background? I had no reference point to anything about business. And so when I started working with him more and more, and you had him on, you know how he is, you had him as a professor. He was the first person who really believed what I was doing before I really believed what I was doing, if that makes sense. Like he really helped me see a pathway that this could be something successful. And when I told him the price point, I wanted to launch it at like $35. I remember him saying like, you're fucking crazy if you think you can sell a deodorant for $35. And he was coming from a place of like, deodorants don't sell that much. And then I thought, maybe he's right. Where are the rich ladies? And so the first place I launched was the Malibu Farmers Market for $35, and they sold like crazy. And right after that, I launched my website.
And that was using the initial first order that you got, the 500 SKU.
Yeah.
Nice. So I think, yeah, you made a great strategic decision because you also just have the higher perception of value with that price point. If no one is pricing at that price point, then you come in and fill that gap.
Yeah.
And especially to sort of price insensitive shoppers in Malibu, it might be the great place to start. Was that a scary moment when you went to that trade show and placed that order for the first 500 units? Because I'm assuming you have to use some of your savings, or did you raise any sort of money to fund that first round?
It was my own money. I had a husband at the time. I have another husband now, but that husband, my now ex-husband, um, he helped give some of the investment money, and then based on his salary, I was able to get an SBA loan, and I owned half of the company, and on paper, he owned half of it because he gave me the money. And 2 months after I launched my business, he told me he wanted a divorce over a phone call. Classy. The grass was blonder on the other
Hmm.
side, and um, I was devastated. I mean, now I'm just so relieved because that was not meant for me. But at the time, I think just that abandoned feeling and what am I going to do? And I just started this company and I had left my career as a makeup artist to really focus on this. And um, I really felt like I had nothing. And so I did, so I was just like this gut feeling of I made sure to get 100% of my company, which he signed over. And, there was a small amount of money that he did help me with. And I am thankful for that. Since then,
Hmm.
I've been able to use the funds from my business. I've been able to get loans. I still own 100% of my business. So that is how, I could give you another story, but that's the honest story of
Hmm.
how I started my business.
Of course, I appreciate the honesty. I think what really impresses me with your story, Holly, is it's incredibly challenging to start a business, period, for anybody, as we mentioned before. But to do so while kind of facing so much personal hardship outside of the business world is almost impossible. And so I guess what I'm curious is what would you say drives you? Why do you do what you do? I think a lot of people when they wake up in the morning there's something that gets them out of bed. There's something that excites them, that motivates them. Do you have that one thing or a couple things?
I think at the time it was helping women have access to something that was healthier for their body. And it's kind of transitioned into a lot of other things that continues to be the reason that I keep doing this because it's so hard. There have been years that it's been so great, and especially during the pandemic, people were buying from home. There was just this insane growth that I had this past year. It's been challenging for a lot of businesses this particular year. Um, Hoping better for 2025. But something that through the ups and downs, I think that keeps me going is one thing is that quitting is not an option. Like giving up is not an option, number one. And then number two, when to go back to that time of that divorce, I spiraled into a really dark place. And it was all the things that I was talking about before. It was years of different things that had happened despite being sober. That divorce was not the reason. It was just, I think, the catalyst of all those other things where I really literally did have a mental breakdown and became really suicidal. And I just didn't want to be here anymore. And during that divorce, I decided to move into this, like, out of that house. I moved into this really small apartment in Pasadena, and they say that your environment is a reflection of your state of mind. And I moved into this really tiny, dark apartment facing a wall with no natural sunlight. And we had two dogs, and I took the dog that we had rescued, Violet. We found her in the bushes. She had been hit by a car and left for 5 days. And during that time of just launching my business, also going into like a really dark place and not wanting to be here. There was a night that I was driving on the 210 freeway and I was praying and I was saying, "Dear God, please just let me get hit." And I was trying to get hit by a semi truck. And um, shortly after, I was in an outpatient rehab, Las Encinas. Did you ever, you're probably too young. Did you ever watch Celebrity Rehab?
I've heard of it.
Okay,
I've heard of it.
Dr. Drew. So when you watch it on TV, it's a lot different than when you're
Hmm.
there as a patient. Looks different too. And I was admitted into the inpatient ward, or told I was going to be put on a 5150. So decided to check myself in, and I had to put my business. I had to like log off my Shopify, or I think I had Square at the time. And someone took care of my dog. And when I got out, I just something had happened. I was still really depressed, but I was going through a lot of still intensive like treatment for therapy. And I think I just started having this vision of how am I going to build this company? And I'll tell this story quickly. I was getting better. I was still really depressed. And there was one night I was at Dupar's in Pasadena and I was like crying in my car with my dog about my life. And I ordered a bunch of food, like so much where the woman said, "How many utensils do you need?" And I said, "Three." And because I was embarrassed and sitting in my car crying and eating. And then I was like, I can't eat all of this. And I thought I'm going to find someone to give this food to. And so I was driving around and it was late and couldn't find anyone. And then I turned onto, ironically, Holly Street. And there was a woman sitting on a park bench with a big blanket over her. And I rolled down my window and she came to the window crying. And she said all night she'd been praying for a meal and that I was an angel and came to her. And we started talking. And she said that she had cancer and she had an appointment in the morning. And I said, we were talking for a while. I said, I can take you. Where will you be? And she pointed to the park bench and she said, right here, I live here. And I say this because that night I went back to my small apartment and that was a moment that really changed my perception. And I just saw the bed that I had and it just looked completely different, like it was a castle. And that's when I started building out like a vision board and I put stores that I wanted to be on. I put Forbes on there. I had all of these things and I put a picture of like the next person I wanted to marry, like the type of person, like a vision board of just all of these things. And things started getting better. And then I promise I'm going to answer your question because I know the question is like, what keeps me going? This is like a really long
No, I
story.
love it. This is great.
But it's going to wrap up to what keeps me going. So I started that vision board. I started changing things. And then I got a call from Urban Outfitters that they wanted to carry my product. And that doesn't happen. Like you usually you start a company and you call every business and everyone says no. And for like a business to call you, that's just not heard of. And I was so excited and I started working on that order. And it was a couple weeks after that had happened with that woman. It was a couple weeks after getting that order from Urban Outfitters that I was going on a walk with my dog. And my therapist at the time, every day, she said, just keep walking. It's going to help be in the sun. And I was planning that order for Urban Outfitters. I was talking to a financial advisor that was helping me through SBDC. And I remember freaking out about it and her saying, Holly, 99% of the things you worry about will never happen. I just went about my day. And the small apartment that I lived, the parking structure was across the street. And I got to the car with my dog. And as I was crossing the street, my dog who I had rescued had been hit by a car, I think maybe from her own PTSD. She had pulled me, which I was told is what saved my life because I didn't know I was going to get hit. A delivery van sped up and turned and drove through my body. And I woke up thinking I was paralyzed and I was in the hospital for a month. And when I was in the emergency room and I was like going off about my life again, there was a nurse and I remember him saying, so crazy. Speaking of those like synchronicities, he said, 99% of the things you worry about never happen. And it's so crazy that someone said that literally right before that happened and right after that accident. And so my very, very long-winded story is to get to what keeps me going. This company of selling deodorant has turned into this really weird thing of becoming a platform to talk about suicide prevention. And it's become this focal point of what I do now. So it's strange how you can start one thing and then it leads to things that you never even expect will come from it.
I also want to highlight that at no point through any of your story, anything we talked about, has there been any indication that you were doing this for the money, right? Like from the beginning, it's not, I want to solve this gap so I can make this massive company and sell it and retire into the sunset. Of course, that would be amazing. And I'm sure it would be a great outcome for you. But from the very beginning, it was about solving a problem for myself. It was about solving a problem for the larger community of women that have this issue. And then again, even now as it's formed this new opportunity of speaking at universities, it's been again about kind of giving back and helping people. Do you think you sort of found this this kind of almost calling through starting women's deodorant.
Oh, 100%. It's like, it's real fucking weird. I'm selling deodorant and I'm talking about suicide prevention. When anyone asks me, I'm like, I'm going to go, and I have to remember to talk like about my business, because I'll get so stuck on this, and not to like harp on trauma and therapy, but I talk about it because I spoke at your class. I've spoken for 8 years now at USC. And part of your assignment, you had Albert last week, and he was saying how he didn't want a boring class. He wanted to do things differently. And part of that is he brings in engaging speakers, and each person has a different experience that are all offer very unique things. And what I realized is you have to write letters to thank the speakers. And I've accidentally gotten a couple letters from other people that I opened. I read one as I was reading it. The other ones I didn't. In that process, I was like, this is not meant for me. And they're very lovely letters. But what I realized is those letters are very different than the letters that I get. The letters that I get, it's people talking about traumatic things that have happened. I've met with a woman from USC who told me something that had happened to her. She had never told anyone. People talk about addiction. They talk about wanting to get off Adderall. That was one of the things that I was addicted to. They talk about therapy, a lot of things. And I keep doing this because I just think that everyone, what I said in the beginning, we all go through difficult things. And I'm just one person that wants to talk about it so people don't feel alone. And it goes back to that asking for help and not being afraid to ask for help. I wasn't afraid to ask for help with my product, with my neighbor. I had other people that there are a lot of people that I'd ask for help with because I didn't know the answer, and I didn't have pride to think I can't ask someone. And the same came from my mental health. There was like a mustard seed of hope that I had. And I've seen the difference that I make in people's lives, and it's why I continue to do this. And it's led to a lot of things. When I got hired from Forbes, I wrote about my story, and they said, we can't publish one-off pieces, but would you like to write for us? And I got hired to write for entrepreneurship and mental health. And I was just recently asked to be the keynote speaker at Princeton. And it was to cover mental health and entrepreneurship, and how feel like I've seamlessly, some of the stories have been long, but can weave these two subjects together. I think it's something that's really needed. And luckily more people are starting to do this, but it's one thing to see people on Instagram or social media talking about business and how much money they have. And yeah, not once I've talked about money. That's not, I'd like to have a lot more. Who doesn't want to have a nice house in Malibu? And like, that's ultimately the goal. You start a company, you want it to be successful. And not to keep going back to Albert, but he was talking about like, there are not these get rich quick schemes when you start a business. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm still in this long marathon that's up and down, but yeah, it's just intentional and with purpose is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to kind of touch on before we unfortunately have to wrap up soon is this idea of manifestation that you brought up at the end, whether it be your husband or kind of business success. Talk to me a little bit about how somebody could go about, maybe implementing this in their life. What are some of the things that, beyond just sort of keeping it in your state of mind or making like a mood board or something like that? How should one think about manifestation and how that can maybe impact their life?
You have to think about it, but not be too obsessive, because you can never predict how things are going to turn out. Or even things with my company, like stores that I've gotten into, you write it down, you see what you want, and then what are the actions that I can take to get there? And if it's not getting there at the timeline that I want, what are more steps that I can take? And the same thing of building a business. Like this manifestation came from, I was using lemon, I had an idea. I said, I'm going to turn it into a company and call it Lemmy. Imagine if when my roommate came back with his ruined Hugo Boss shirt, if I said like, that's it, I'm fucking quitting.
Yeah.
I didn't. And what's the next step? So I think it's seeing the long term, like what do you want and what are the steps that you can take to achieve it?
You had this kind of relentless pursuit from 2018 to 2024 of like, setbacks, but how am I going to figure it out? How am I going to overcome this hurdle and keep building the company.
Yeah. Even now with this year, this was the first year I was like, does it make sense to keep doing this? Because it's just been a struggle. And like, why was it doing so well the year before? And I do believe it will pick up again. And this is just what happens in business. But yeah, it goes back to like, what can I do right now to make things better and to bring in more revenue or whatever it is in your life that's not working out how you want it? What can you do to make things better?
Hmm. Yeah, it's almost like when you have such rocket ship growth, that becomes the new standard. And then, if you have something that's less than that, it's like, what am I doing wrong here? Even though that
Yeah.
just sort of could be the natural, macroeconomic landscape of growth. Um, I'm curious throughout your career, this is something I like to ask all my guests, what has the kind of accumulation of money taught you about the relationship between money and happiness?
I will say this. Money doesn't make you happy, but it makes life a lot easier. It makes it a lot easier. And I've gone through periods of having a lot of money, especially with my company, where I didn't know that my company could make that much money that quickly. And then you have a business, and especially when it's an inventory intensive type of business, money goes out. I've had periods within my business of having a lot of money, having not that much money. How am I going to get to the next phase type of periods? And in my personal life, having a lot of money, like up and down. That's why I go
Hmm.
back to like, you really have to. And that's something in the past year that I really focused on. How can I be better with my finances? Because money doesn't guarantee happiness, but the lack of will guarantee um, trouble and,
Hmm.
and struggle. And that's, I think, what people want to avoid. So it's not going to make you happy, but in a way, it kind of does in some strange way because you can you can do more things, you can help more people, and
Hmm.
then if you have a decent amount of money and you can help charities that you want to help, I mean that's a fulfilling thing. You can still help with your time if you don't have that, which can also be fulfilling. You can go on trips that you've wanted to. So yeah, it doesn't. I don't know. I don't know if happy is the exact word, but it does make
Hmm.
life easier.
No, of course, exactly. And the answer to that is obviously never yes, it makes you happy. I'm always curious kind of what the breakdown is of how
Yeah.
people think about it. Um, I thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank
We
you.
have the book to look forward to, the new stick deodorant of Madame Lemmy to look forward
Thanks,
to.
Moise.
Of course, exactly. Where can people find the product today? Is it mostly online or in retailers around?
We're on madamelemmy.com. We sell with Amazon. We sell with some Four Seasons, Ritz, Waldorf spas. I believe we're going to start selling with Macy's again soon, which is exciting with the stick deodorant. A lot of spas, but primarily we're online.
Sounds good. And again, thank you so much for coming on and congratulations on everything you've accomplished.